Traditional models of perception are based on a linear mechanical causal chain which originates with the art object and through waves, receptors, and nerve impulses result as brain activity in the viewer. The stream of sensorial data is transformed by the brain into an imagistic representation that the audiovisual center in our head plays back as consciousness in the Cartesian theater of the mind. In the relation that ensues between the viewer and the art object, a divide emerges between the unitary preconstituted I that does the processing and the other that is processed, so that the me subject and the it object exist as fully determined, static, standalone entities where the viewer passively takes in the experience. As an alternative, we propose a perceptual causal chain that underlines a machinic experiential interpretation of the interactive process where the viewer becomes one with the artwork in the experiential milieu, usually known as the exhibition space. We seek to consider the experiential milieu itself as a conditioning environment for the subjected entity to come into being, and we locate it at the junction of the site of exhibition, the art object, and the viewer function, where the virtual and the actual coincide and become pure experience. In order to do that, we put aside the linear perceptual causal chain and replace it with a remapping of the experiential milieu, where the viewer becomes one with the artwork world within which she is enveloped. Tamsin-Lorraine asserts that what is at stake is a consideration of how things connect rather than how they are, and of focusing on things in terms of unfolding forces rather than their consideration as static essences. In French, the word milieu is normally understood as the ensemble of external conditions within which a living being lives and develops, or as the assemblage of material objects and physical circumstances which surround and influence an organism. Conceptually, milieu can also be seen as the locus of the dynamic interaction of all the factors and mechanisms that participate in the sustenance of an ecosystem. To paraphrase Brian Masumi, the term milieu should be read as a technical term combining all these meanings. As applied to an artwork, the descriptive term associated, in reference to milieu, as used by French philosopher Gilbert Simondon in his book Du mode d'existence des objets techniques, refers to a specific mapping of an ensemble of constitutive elements and conditioning environmental modalities that come together to create a concretized individuation by the ongoing energetic exchanges that take place within that specific milieu. Even though the artwork represents the locus of a closed set of an infinite number of potentials, the conditioning environment will activate only a specific set of potentials for relation or territories. For example, the work of art as part of the mapping of the environment of creation brings out a different set of relations than those activated by the environment of exhibition or the environment of the auction house, even though we are always dealing with the same artwork. In this presentation, we will look at the artwork within the space of exhibition. For the associated milieu to take hold, the viewer needs to realize the work, that is, come to terms with it, by establishing a relationship with the work, a relationship which typically happens in the exhibition space or gallery, but can also occur in a public space in the instance of urban art or on a computer monitor for web-based artwork. The need for an enabling environment to allow the process of engaging the artwork by the viewer in the formation of an associated milieu has been demonstrated empirically. The installation The Empty Museum by Russian artists Ilya and Emilia Kabakov, shown at the 5th Mercosul Biennale in Porto Alegre in Brazil in 2007, is a case in point. This piece reconstructs a true-to-life exhibit room from a traditional museum in a room at the Biennale, except that there are no pictures on the walls. Although the walls are empty, with illumination highlighting where the pictures ought to be, the viewers engage the environment and exhibit of missing pictures in the same way as if there were pictures on the wall. This piece shows that the exhibition space is integral to defining the associated milieu, in that it constitutes the enabling conditions for the relations to take hold, and thereby define the territory. Although there is an infinite number of these territories or potential zones conducive to relational exchange that can be mapped, we can identify several major ones. As we have just seen, the exhibition space constitutes a set of territorializing conditions. The curatorial drive constitutes another set, the content of the work another, while the viewer constitutes yet another. Together, they make up a milieu given the mapping we are selecting to represent the territories we wish to engage in relation. Even though the basic axis of relation that defines a machinic assemblage happens between the viewer and the artwork, the territorial preconditions of the art gallery that encourage the viewer to entertain a heightened relation with the art object are not only material inductions but experiential ones as well. These territorializations entrain, captivate, and entrance the viewer into relation by grounding or preconditioning the relations that are setting up the incipient experiential event taking form. That is, the way that the artwork will be seen, engaged with, and appreciated. We have to keep in mind that the event here is not the happening of the exhibit, but that which emerges from the associated milieu. The coming together of these territories can be seen as a machinic assemblage which at its most basic combines the place of exhibition, the artwork, and the viewer. Obviously, we are referring to an abstract machine and not to a physical mechanical one. If we define a machine as an assemblage of moving parts that work in unison toward a common objective, we can then ask what represents the common objective of the art object in the associated milieu as a machinic assemblage. It is the production of blocks of pure sensation made up of percepts and affects that continually alter the relations. In this respect, we can say that a percept is a novel way of seeing, affect a novel way of feeling, and sensation is a spontaneous ultimate content and expression of the relation in the sense of the operation of passing from the objectivity of the data to the subjectivity of the actual occasion as a process and thereby constituting the associated milieu as variation of perception and feeling. The artwork, viewer, and the associated milieu construct each other within a facilitating environment so that the associated milieu becomes a space-time which upholds the dynamic relations that take place in the encounter of the artwork and the viewer. Without these preconditions, the event as an assemblage cannot emerge, since each element is a fundamental contributor to that which constitutes the experience and an integral determinant of the assemblage. In the delusion conception of the event qua event, the event is more than just a noteworthy happening, even though it does work in this sense as well. The associated milieu is the dynamic becoming conjunction of the environmental, the work, and the viewer, and we have to keep in mind that the equation is not linear. It is not A plus B plus C plus D equals a machinic assemblage, but one where the variable synchronous participation in the relation is what dynamically defines them as they simultaneously instigate their own becoming. They define each other within the process of becoming in actuality as they go on to become the objective data for new becoming. The associated milieu encompasses and overarches them all to create an open machinic entity whose constitutive elementary dynamic simultaneous relations combine to create an individuated virtual unit at the level of species. While engaging the art object, the viewer is engaged in a continuous process of simultaneous deterritorializing and reterritorializing relations. The content of the work redefines the viewer, while they are both redefined through the experience within the conditioning environmental, technological, curatorial, social, political, and historical conditions that presuppose what we are calling the associated milieu. This working together of tangible and intangible relations and the creation of relational territories through the deterritorializing and the reterritorializing assemblages is what constitutes the abstract machine. In other words, in the associated milieu as a machinic assemblage, the experience incessantly reinvents the event as a subjectified cluster of shifting relations which undoes that which we commonly refer to as a preconstituted I. In conclusion, the act of engaging the artwork by the viewer is akin to recreating it through the experience that allows the viewer to realize it. This process causes the creation of the associated milieu, which allows the artwork, the exhibition hall, and the viewer to interdependently come into being. The artwork, the exhibition hall, the viewer, and the associated milieu construct each other and come together as a machinic entity, as an assemblage of moving parts that work in unison toward a common objective, an individuated space-time which upholds the dynamic relations that take place in the encounter of the artwork and the viewer within the associated milieu.